"Please, just make it quick," she said. Yet the rancher dropped his rifle and held her instead. The sun hung low in the wide Texas sky, painting the prairie in shades of gold and orange. The wind whispered softly through the tall grasses, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and wildflowers. James McAllister, a man in his late 40s, rode slowly along the fence line of his sprawling ranch, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Years of living alone had made him a man of routine. He woke before dawn, tended to the horses, checked the fences, and made sure the livestock were safe. It was a life of hard work, solitude, and quiet reflection. Most people would have called it lonely, but to James it was simple, steady, and honest. The ranch was all he had left. His parents had passed when he was young, leaving him to inherit the land that had been in his family for generations. There had been talks of selling it, of moving to the city and starting over, but James could never imagine leaving the prairie. There was something in the endless horizon, in the way the sun set behind the distant hills, that felt like home. The land had a rhythm, a heartbeat, that matched his own. And for years that rhythm had been enough. But that afternoon, as he rode along the dusty trail, James noticed something unusual. Near a bend in the fence, where the grass grew taller and the prairie seemed to hold its breath, he saw a figure slumped on the ground. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a stray calf or a lost dog, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a person. A young woman, no older than 25, lay there, her clothing torn and dusty, her hair matted with dirt and sweat. She looked small against the vastness of the land, fragile and vulnerable. James slowed his horse, unsure what he should do. His hand instinctively went to the rifle slung across his back. In all his years on the ranch, he had learned to be cautious. The world could be dangerous, even in such open spaces. He had heard stories of travelers getting lost, of bandits preying on the weak, and he knew he had to be careful. Yet as he studied the woman's face, he noticed something that made him hesitate. There was no anger, no threat in her expression, only exhaustion and fear. Her eyes met his, wide and pleading, and James felt a strange pull in his chest. "Please, just make it quick," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words sent a shiver down his spine. He tightened his grip on the reins, unsure whether she meant it as a threat, a plea for help, or something he could not yet understand. He had never encountered anyone like this before, someone so fragile, so alone, and so desperate. For a long moment he simply watched her, trying to read her intentions. She did not reach for a weapon, she did not move to attack, and yet there was a tension in the air that made his heart beat faster. James had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm, to think clearly in difficult situations, but this moment tested him in a way he had never experienced. He had to decide, would he approach her, or would he ride away and leave her to the mercy of the prairie? Something deep inside him stirred. He thought of the years he had spent alone, of the quiet nights spent by the fire, of the loneliness that sometimes pressed against his chest like a weight. He realized he could not turn away. Not this time. Lowering his rifle slowly, he dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He wanted to show her that he meant no harm, that he was not a threat. "Hey!" he said gently, keeping his voice calm and steady. "It's okay! I'm not going to hurt you!" The woman's eyes flickered with a mix of relief and fear. She tried to speak, but her lips quivered, and she could not find the words. James took another cautious step closer, noticing the dirt and sweat on her face, the scratches along her arms, and the way she shivered despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was clear she had been through something difficult, something that had left her weak and scared. James reached out a hand, careful to keep his movements non-threatening. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded slowly, though her body shook as she tried to rise. James moved closer, offering support, and she leaned against him, her strength nearly gone. Together, they made their way to a shaded area beneath a lone oak tree, where James led his horse closer to provide a sense of safety. As she settled to sit on the grass, James studied her more closely. Her clothing was torn, likely caught on brush or rocks during a long trek across the prairie. Her shoes were worn thin, her hands blistered and dirty from travel or labor. Every detail told a story of struggle and survival, of a journey that had tested her in ways James could barely imagine. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head, though he could see faint bruises forming along her arms and legs. "Just tired," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I didn't think anyone would find me." James felt a pang of sympathy. He had seen people lost in the prairie before, travelers who underestimated the vastness and harshness of the land. But this was different. This woman was not just lost, she had endured. She had survived something that might have broken a lesser person. And yet, despite her exhaustion, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a resilience that spoke of courage and determination. He offered her water from his canteen, and she drank eagerly, her hands trembling as they gripped the metal cup. James watched her carefully, making sure she drank slowly and didn't choke. "My name is James," he said. "I own this ranch. You're safe here. For now." She looked at him, a flicker of trust passing over her face. I'm Emma," she whispered. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but there was a steadiness beneath it that told James she had endured much. For the next hour, James helped Emma rest under the tree, offering her food from his pack and speaking in calm, reassuring tones. He could see the tension slowly leaving her body, the fear in her eyes softening as she realized she was not alone. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the prairie, and James knew they needed to move before darkness fell. He guided Emma to the ranch on foot, supporting her as she walked. The journey was slow, but every step brought her closer to safety, closer to warmth, and closer to a sense of hope she had not felt in a long time. James kept his eyes on the horizon, alert for any signs of danger, but also aware of the quiet miracle unfolding beside him. By the time they reached the small homestead, the sky had turned deep purple, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. The ranch, modest but sturdy, seemed to welcome her with its warm glow and the scent of hay and wood smoke. James led her inside, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting a comforting light across the room. Emma sank into a chair by the fire, exhaustion finally catching up to her. James handed her a warm blanket and a bowl of soup, watching as she slowly regained some of her strength. He did not press her for answers, did not demand a story. He simply offered safety, warmth, and a quiet understanding. As he stepped outside to tend to the animals, James glanced back at her sitting by the fire. He felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring in his chest, a mixture of protectiveness, curiosity, and a quiet hope. He had found many things on this land over the years: lost calves, wandering travelers, and the occasional stray animal. But nothing had ever touched him quite like this. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, bathed in the soft light of dusk. For the first time in many years, James realized that life could change in an instant, that moments of danger and fear could transform into moments of connection and trust. He had come across someone at their most vulnerable, someone whose life had been shaped by hardship and courage. And in that moment he made a silent promise to protect her, to offer her a safe place, and to see where this unexpected encounter would lead. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and distant rain. The world outside remained vast, unpredictable, and often harsh. But inside the small ranch there was warmth, safety, and the beginning of a bond that neither James nor Emma could have anticipated. As night fell, the stars twinkled above, and for the first time in a long while, two lonely souls felt the possibility of hope, trust, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. Emma sat by the fire, the warmth slowly seeping into her cold, tired body. Her hands were still shaking, but the steady light of the hearth along with the quiet presence of James made her feel a little less alone. She had been on her own for so long that the idea of safety felt foreign, almost impossible. Yet here she was, inside a small ranch, where the wind and the prairie could not reach her, and where someone had chosen not to turn away. James moved quietly around the room, preparing simple food and stacking firewood. He noticed how careful she was not to make sudden movements, how she flinched at sounds that were ordinary to him. The creak of the floorboards, the snap of a log in the fire. He understood. Years alone on the prairie had taught him that the world could be unpredictable, and he knew it would take time for Emma to trust him fully. After a while, he sat across from her, holding a cup of warm tea. "Drink slowly," he advised gently. "You've been without food and water for a long time." Emma nodded, her lips trembling as she sipped. She looked at him with cautious eyes. There was something about James, a quiet strength, a calm patience, that felt different from anyone she had met before. He didn't ask too many questions, and yet he seemed to understand her without words. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind blew softly through the prairie grass, carrying the distant cries of coyotes. The night was calm, almost serene, yet both of them carried the weight of uncertainty. Emma finally broke the silence.
I didn't think anyone would find me, she whispered, her voice barely audible.
James nodded. The prairie is wide, but it can't hide someone completely. I've lived here all my life. I know the land, and I noticed you when you were lying near the fence. You weren't alone for long. Emma lowered her gaze. I was trying to get away from everything. Her voice cracked, and James saw tears glisten in her eyes. She wiped them quickly, as if ashamed to show her vulnerability. I didn't want anyone to find me. I thought it would be easier if I wasn't here. James felt a lump in his throat. He had known loneliness, yes, but he had never experienced the kind of fear that came from feeling truly unwanted, truly alone. He realized that Emma's words were not just about being lost on the prairie. They were about a life filled with hardships, struggles, and disappointments that had driven her to the edge. He spoke softly, carefully. You don't have to go through it alone anymore. Not here. You're safe now. Emma looked at him, and for a moment her eyes searched his face, trying to see if he meant what he said. There was no judgment in his gaze, no expectation, just quiet understanding. It was the first time in a long time that someone had offered her more than just words. They offered a chance to trust, a chance to survive without fear. I don't know if I can stay, she admitted. I've been on my own for so long it feels strange to depend on someone else. And I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, James said firmly.
Everyone needs help sometimes. Everyone needs a place where they can rest.
That's all I'm offering, a place to rest, nothing more. She studied him silently. His face was calm, lines of age and experience etched around his eyes, yet there was softness in the way he spoke, in the way he moved. She realized that for the first time in weeks she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. As the night deepened, James told her a little about the ranch, about the land he had inherited from his parents, and about the simple life he led. He spoke of the horses he cared for, of the small vegetable garden, of the quiet satisfaction that came from working with his hands and watching the seasons change. His words were simple, but they carried warmth, a sense of grounding and a hint of pride, not in wealth or fame, but in surviving, in living honestly, in finding contentment in the small things. Emma listened, fascinated. She had lived a life of chaos, of running, of uncertainty, and she had rarely encountered such stability. It was strange and comforting to hear someone speak of life in such calm terms, without fear, without anxiety. She realized that James's world was different from hers, steady, predictable, and yet alive with small joys that she had long forgotten existed. When she finally asked him about his life before the ranch, James smiled faintly. It wasn't always easy. I lost people I cared about. My parents, my brother. I learned to live with the emptiness, to find peace in the land. It's not a life for everyone, but it's enough for me. Emma nodded quietly. She understood loss more than most people ever could. Her own family had abandoned her, leaving her to face hardships alone. She had wandered from town to town, from one shelter to another, always seeking a place where she could belong, and always finding disappointment instead. And yet, here she was, sitting by a fire in a ranch that felt safe. James noticed the change in her posture, the way she leaned slightly back, the way her shoulders, which had been tense, were beginning to relax. It was subtle, but it mattered. Trust was not given quickly, especially not to someone who had been through as much as she had. He knew that it would take patience, understanding, and quiet actions to show her that she could rely on him. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the prairie, casting a warm glow on the land. Birds chirped in the distance, and the smell of fresh dew and wildflowers filled the air. Emma woke early, feeling slightly better after a night of rest. James was already outside, tending to the horses, his movements calm and deliberate. He glanced over at her and nodded, a silent greeting that carried reassurance. She joined him, slowly walking toward the barn. "I can help," she said softly, almost shyly. James smiled. "I'd appreciate that. There's always work to be done here." "You don't have to do much at first. Just small things. Feed the chickens, gather the eggs, help with the garden." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time in weeks. The simple tasks, the steady rhythm of the ranch, offered a distraction from her fears and gave her a small sense of control over her life. As they worked side by side, the silence was comfortable, filled with quiet companionship rather than tension. Over the next few days, a routine began to form. Emma learned how to care for the animals, how to mend fences, and how to cook simple meals. James taught her patiently, never rushing, never criticizing. He noticed her strengths, her careful attention to detail, her resilience, her determination, and he encouraged her quietly, allowing her to regain confidence in herself. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Emma finally spoke about her past. I didn't always have a home," she admitted. "I ran from people who were supposed to care for me. I trusted, and it ended badly."
"I thought being alone was safer." Her voice trembled, but she continued.
"I didn't know if I could trust anyone anymore. But I feel different here. I feel safe." James listened carefully, his expression gentle. "Safety isn't something everyone can give you, Emma. But it's something you can accept. You're strong for surviving what you did. And you're brave for being here, facing the world again." Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that someone cared, that someone would protect her, and that she could find a place where she belonged. Days turned into a week, and with each passing day, the bond between James and Emma grew. It was not sudden or dramatic. There were no declarations of love, no grand gestures. It was quiet, steady, built on shared work, trust, and small acts of kindness. James noticed how Emma's eyes brightened when she accomplished a task, how her laughter, though soft, began to fill the small ranch, and Emma noticed James's quiet patience, the way he moved with care, and the way he listened without judgment. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the prairie, Emma spoke softly. "I don't know what the future holds. I've learned not to hope too much, but I think this place, and you, might be what I needed." James looked at her, feeling an unexpected warmth in his chest. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said. "That's all anyone can do." And for the first time in a long while, both of them felt a quiet sense of possibility. They were not just two people surviving the harshness of life. They were beginning to find comfort, trust, and the first hints of something deeper, something that might grow if they allowed it. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden under the fading light, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt that she could breathe without fear, and James realized that sometimes helping someone in need could also heal a part of himself he had long forgotten existed. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, filling the small kitchen with warm light. Emma stirred awake, feeling the soft blanket around her shoulders and the quiet calm of the room. For the first time in a long while, she had slept through the night without waking in fear. She took a deep breath, savoring the stillness, and listened to the faint sounds of James moving about outside. The ranch had begun to feel like more than just a place to rest. It was starting to feel like home. The walls, simple and unadorned, carried the warmth of years of care. The hearth had become a place of comfort, and the smell of fresh bread and cooked vegetables reminded her of safety. Emma could feel a small sense of normalcy returning, something she had thought was lost forever. When she stepped outside, she found James already tending to the horses. His movements were careful and precise, a rhythm he had perfected over years of working with the animals. The horses seemed to respond to his presence with calm, gentle whinnies. Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure how to approach him. She did not want to intrude, yet she felt a strong desire to be a part of this quiet world he had created. James noticed her and smiled.
Good morning. Sleep well. Emma nodded. Better than I have in a long time.
She glanced at the horses, then back at him.
I want to help today, can I?
James's smile widened slightly.
Of course. We have plenty to do. Nothing too difficult at first. Just the usual chores. Feed the animals, check the fences, and water the garden. It'll keep you busy, and it'll help you get used to the routine here.
She followed him to the barn, where the smell of hay and animals filled the air. At first, the tasks were simple: collecting eggs, feeding the chickens, brushing the horses, but they were also grounding. Each small accomplishment gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. As she worked, James observed her quietly, offering gentle guidance when needed, never rushing, never criticizing.
You're a fast learner,
he said when she successfully led one of the horses back to the stable.
You've got a natural way with them.
Emma smiled faintly, feeling a small pride swell in her chest.
I used to help my uncle with animals when I was younger. Not as much as you, though.
James chuckled softly. Well, it shows.
You're careful, patient, and strong. That's important out here.
The hours passed quickly. The sun climbed higher, warming the prairie and turning the dust in the air into golden particles that danced in the light. Emma found herself talking more, sharing small stories from her past, about the town she had passed through, the little job she had held, and the people who had come and gone from her life. James listened without judgment, nodding or asking quiet questions when appropriate. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt that someone was truly listening, that her story mattered. By mid-afternoon, they moved to the vegetable garden. Emma knelt beside rows of growing plants, pulling weeds carefully and watering the soil. James worked beside her, his hands steady and strong, digging and planting seeds. There was a comforting silence in their work, broken only by the occasional bird call or the rustle of wind through the tall grasses. Emma found a quiet joy in these simple tasks, a feeling she had thought was long gone.
You know,
James said after a moment, breaking the silence, life here isn't easy, but it has a rhythm.
There's satisfaction in doing things with your hands, in watching something grow, in caring for the animals and the land. It's not about wealth or recognition. It's about survival, and about finding peace in the small things.
Emma nodded slowly.
I think I understand. It feels
different from everything I've known. Busy, but calm. Safe, but alive. She paused, looking down at the plants. I've never had a place like this before. A place I could call home. James didn't respond immediately. He simply continued working, letting her words settle in the air. Then he spoke quietly.
Home isn't always a building or a place. Sometimes it's the people, the routine, the feeling that someone cares. You've already started finding that here, Emma. And you can choose to stay, to learn, and to grow. That's the hardest part, choosing trust after being hurt. But you've done it.
Emma felt her heart tighten. Trust had always been difficult for her. People had let her down so many times that she had learned to rely only on herself. But here, on this ranch, with James's quiet presence in the safety of the land, she felt a small shift inside her.
Perhaps trust was possible. Perhaps she didn't have to face the world alone anymore.
As the day drew to a close, James guided Emma back to the barn. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie and painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The animals were settled for the night, and the ranch was quiet except for the soft sounds of evening. Crickets chirping, the wind brushing the grass, and the faint, distant howl of a coyote. James looked at Emma and smiled gently. You did well today.
I can see you're adjusting. It takes time, but you're getting there.
Emma smiled back, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the sun. "Thank you for letting me stay."
For trusting me. James nodded. Trust is earned, Emma. And you're earning it every day just by being yourself.
That night, as Emma lay in the small guest room, she reflected on the day. She realized that her body was tired in a good way. Tired from work, from learning, from doing something productive. Her mind, however, was quieter than it had been in months. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the constant tension of fear or the weight of being alone. The ranch, James, and even the simple routines of daily life were beginning to give her a sense of stability she had never known. Days turned into a week, and with each passing day, Emma's confidence grew. She became more skilled at handling the animals, more comfortable with the chores, and more at ease with the rhythms of the ranch. James continued to guide her with quiet patience, never forcing her to do more than she could, but always encouraging her to take small steps forward. Their relationship remained simple, built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared sense of purpose. One afternoon, as they rested on the porch after finishing the day's work, Emma looked out across the prairie. The horizon seemed endless, stretching beyond anything she had ever known. The sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with fluffy clouds, and the wind carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. She felt a sense of wonder she hadn't experienced in years. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," she admitted softly. "Like life could be
good, safe, worth living."
James turned to her, his eyes gentle. "It's amazing what a little stability can do."
And sometimes it's not just about surviving. It's about noticing the small joys, the sun, the wind, the work you do, the people you trust. You've already started seeing that.
Emma smiled faintly. She realized he was right. For months, her life had been a series of struggles and constant movement, never stopping long enough to appreciate anything. Now, with each day on the ranch, she noticed small moments, the way the sun sparkled on the horse's coat, the taste of fresh vegetables from the garden, the quiet laughter she shared with James. Life, for the first time in a long time, felt manageable, even beautiful. That evening after supper, James and Emma sat quietly by the fire. The warmth of the flames mirrored the growing warmth in their hearts. Emma reflected on the past week, the work, the conversations, the small victories, and the gentle guidance James had offered. She realized that this place, this life, was teaching her not just to survive, but to hope. And in that quiet moment, with the fire crackling and the prairie stretching endlessly beyond the walls, Emma understood something important. She could heal. She could trust. She could belong. And though the future was still uncertain, she knew she no longer had to face it alone. James, watching her quietly, felt a sense of satisfaction that had little to do with work and everything to do with human connection. He had found someone who needed help, and in helping her, he had discovered a new purpose, a renewed sense of meaning in his own life. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a place of connection, of trust, and of quiet companionship. The prairie winds whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of new days, new beginnings, and the slow, steady growth of a bond that neither James nor Emma could have predicted. And as the night settled over the ranch, both of them felt the first real sense of hope in a long, long time. Weeks passed on the ranch, and the rhythm of life settled into a comforting routine. The mornings were filled with the sounds of birds, the soft clatter of the horses' hooves, and the faint whistle of wind over the prairie. Emma had grown stronger, more confident, and more skilled in handling the daily chores. She could feed the animals without guidance, tend the garden with careful precision, and even repair broken fences alongside James. Each task she accomplished gave her a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. The bond between James and Emma was growing, but it was not sudden or dramatic. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of feelings, only the slow, steady strengthening of trust. They shared small moments throughout the day. A laugh when a stubborn horse refused to move, a quiet conversation during supper, or simply sitting together on the porch as the sun painted the prairie in soft gold. These moments carried a gentle warmth, a sense of companionship that neither of them had expected but both were quietly grateful for. One late afternoon, James suggested a break after finishing the barn chores. The sky was painted in hues of pink and orange, and the wind carried the sweet scent of wildflowers from the distant fields. Emma sat on the wooden steps of the porch, her hands resting in her lap, feeling the exhaustion of the day in a good, satisfying way. James joined her, settling into the old rocking chair with a calm, familiar ease. "You've adapted quickly," James said, his voice quiet but warm.
"I'm impressed by how much you've learned in just a few weeks."
Emma smiled softly. "It's because I want to be useful."
"I don't want to just sit here and do nothing. I want to help, and I want to belong."
Her eyes met his, searching for understanding. James nodded.
"Belonging is earned, and you're earning it every day. You're showing patience, care, and strength. Those things matter more than anything else on this ranch."
She looked away for a moment, thinking about the years of fear, running, and loneliness that had shaped her life. "I have spent so long thinking no one could ever care, that trusting anyone was too dangerous. But being here, with you, with this land, it feels different. Safe, but also alive. I don't feel like I'm hiding anymore." James watched her quietly, sensing the depth of her words. He understood what she meant. Trust was fragile, built slowly and carefully, and Emma had taken the first brave steps toward it. It was a rare gift to witness, and he felt a protective instinct rising within him. Not one of control, but of care. He wanted her to feel secure, to know that she could rely on him without fear. "Safety isn't just about walls or fences," he said thoughtfully. "It's about knowing someone is there when you need them, that someone won't turn away."
"You've started building that here, Emma, and that's something precious."
"It doesn't happen easily, but it's worth holding on to." Emma let out a small breath, a mixture of relief and gratitude.
She realized that she had never experienced words like these before, not from anyone in her life. They were not commands, not lectures, not criticism, only acknowledgement and understanding. She felt a warmth growing in her chest, the flicker of hope that perhaps, after all the hardship, she could finally trust again. Over the next few days, their routine continued, but now it carried a subtle shift. There was more laughter, more shared observation of the prairie and its quiet beauty, and small acts of care that went unnoticed by anyone outside the ranch but mattered deeply to both of them. James would leave extra water by the barn for Emma, knowing she would be working alone in the hot sun, and she would quietly sweep the porch or tidy the kitchen, small gestures that showed appreciation without words. One evening, a summer storm rolled in across the prairie. Dark clouds stretched across the sky, and the wind began to howl with increasing strength. Emma had never experienced a storm of this intensity before, and as the rain began to lash against the windows, she felt a twinge of fear. She moved closer to the hearth where James was stoking the fire, and he noticed her unease immediately. "Storms can be frightening," he said softly. "But this ranch will keep us safe. The walls are strong, the animals are secure, and we'll be fine." Emma nodded, grateful for his reassurance. She realized that part of trust was not just believing in someone's words, but feeling their calm presence, the quiet confidence that came from experience and care. She leaned slightly toward him, not out of dependence, but out of the simple human need for connection, for reassurance, for the silent affirmation that she was not alone. The storm raged through the night, lightning flashing across the prairie and thunder rolling through the valleys. But inside the ranch there was warmth and safety. Emma found herself opening up in small ways, sharing more about her past, about the moments she had been most afraid, and about the people she had lost or left behind. James listened patiently, offering gentle guidance or quiet acknowledgement, never pressing too hard, never judging. By the time the storm passed, the prairie glistened with fresh rain, and the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in soft pastels. The storm had been frightening, yes, but it had also been a test of their growing bond. Emma realized that she had faced fear and survived it, with James beside her as a steady presence, a reminder that trust could be real and that protection could come from someone who genuinely cared.
Days turned into weeks, and their bond continued to grow. James began sharing more about his own life, Not just the ranch or the work, but the losses and regrets that had shaped him.
He spoke of his parents and the lessons they had taught him, of his brother and the grief that had never fully left him, and of the loneliness that had once defined his existence. Emma listened with empathy, understanding the weight of living with loss, the quiet resilience required to continue.
In turn, Emma shared her dreams. Not grand ambitions, but simple hopes. A place to belong, a chance to feel safe, and the possibility of living without constant fear.
James encouraged her, reminding her that small steps could lead to meaningful change and that her past did not have to dictate her future. One quiet evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the prairie hills, Emma spoke softly.
I never thought I'd feel this way again. I thought I'd always be running, always hiding. But being here with you, it feels like I might have a chance at something different. Something good.
James looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips.
It's amazing how life can change when you least expect it. You've taken the first steps toward healing, Emma. And I'll be here, helping you every step of the way. She felt her chest tighten, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something she couldn't yet name. Trust, hope, and companionship were blending together, forming a bond she had longed for but never dared to imagine. It was not love, not yet, not in the way fairy tales described, but it was deeper, steadier, and more real. A connection born from shared experiences, mutual respect, and quiet understanding.
The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden in the fading light, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and wild flowers. The ranch had become more than a shelter. It was a place of healing, of growth, and of quiet joy. And as night fell, with stars twinkling overhead, Emma realized that she no longer feared the future as she once had. She had found not only a safe place, but also a person she could rely on, a companion in the vast, unpredictable world.
James, watching the prairie from the porch, felt a quiet satisfaction as well.
He had spent years in solitude, believing that life was only about survival and work. But in helping Emma, he had rediscovered something he thought was lost: the warmth of human connection, the quiet joy of companionship, and the gentle strength that comes from caring for another person. That night, as the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the ranch lay peaceful under the stars, both of them felt a sense of calm and hope that had been absent for far too long. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of their pasts, yet together they were finding a new path, a path built on trust, understanding, and the quiet promise of shared life.
And though they did not know what the future would bring, one thing was certain: neither of them would face it alone. Spring arrived on the prairie with a gentle softness.
The air was filled with the sweet scent of wild flowers and freshly sprouting grass. The ranch, which had already begun to feel like a home, seemed to breathe with new life. Emma moved through the gardens, checking each plant carefully, her hands steady and confident. The animals, now accustomed to her presence, followed her with a quiet trust. Life on the ranch had become a rhythm, a harmony of work, care, and the subtle beauty of nature. James watched her from a distance, a small smile touching his lips. She had grown stronger not just in body but in spirit. The fear and uncertainty that had once clouded her eyes were slowly being replaced by calm determination and quiet joy. He had seen her laugh for the first time in weeks, seen her relax fully into the simple, steady life of the ranch, and it filled him with a sense of pride and relief. He knew that trust once given was fragile, and he wanted to protect it with all his care. That morning, Jane suggested they check the northern pastures. The land stretched wide and open, dotted with wildflowers and small clusters of trees, the horizon stretching endlessly under a clear blue sky. Emma walked beside him, her stride confident, her hands occasionally brushing against the tall grass. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding and the quiet beauty of the prairie.
"You've come a long way," James said finally, breaking the calm. "A few weeks ago, you could barely stand on your own. Now you move with purpose, and you're learning to trust again." "That's not easy after everything you've been through."
Emma smiled faintly. a mixture of gratitude and humility in her expression.
I know.
I feel different, stronger.
I don't feel afraid all the time anymore, and I think I've started to believe that life can be kind, even after everything that happened.
James nodded thoughtfully. Kindness is rare, but it exists.
You found it here, and you've also learned to give it back. That's what makes this work, not just surviving, but caring and helping others along the way.
As they walked, Emma noticed the small changes in the land. The fences had been repaired, the garden was thriving, and the animals seemed healthier, happier. She realized that she had been part of this transformation, that her presence had not only helped the ranch but had also given her a sense of belonging she had never experienced before.
When they returned to the ranch house, James suggested they take a break on the porch.
The sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden shadows across the prairie. Emma sat down, letting the warmth of the sun sink into her skin. James joined her, his chair creaking softly as he settled in. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to watch the vast, open land that had become their shared world. Finally, Emma broke the silence.
James, I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't found me that day. I thought my life was over. I thought there was no one left I could trust. But you gave me a chance, a real chance.
James's eyes softened. You gave yourself a chance too, Emma.
You allowed yourself to trust again, to take small steps forward. That's not easy, and it shows more strength than you realize. I only helped guide you along the way.
She smiled, feeling a warmth that was deeper than anything she had felt in a long time.
I think this place and you have changed me. I feel like I can start over, not just survive, but really live.
And I don't feel alone anymore.
James nodded quietly, understanding the weight of her words.
He, too, had changed over the past weeks. The ranch had always been his life, but it had been lonely.
He had been strong, capable, and independent, but he had lacked the warmth of companionship, the quiet joy of sharing life with someone who trusted him and relied on him. Emma's presence had brought a new dimension to his life, a gentle light that he had not expected but now could not imagine being without. The following days were filled with laughter, work, and small adventures. Emma explored the edges of the property she had not yet visited, often accompanied by James. They would ride the horses together across the open fields, sometimes racing, sometimes walking slowly, letting the wind carry away the tension of the past. They shared meals, simple but satisfying, and spent evenings talking quietly by the fire, discussing dreams, hopes, and the future. One afternoon, Emma suggested they take a walk toward the small creek that ran along the northern boundary of the ranch. The water sparkled under the sunlight, and wildflowers grew along the banks.
It was a peaceful place, one that had been part of the land long before either of them had been there. As they sat by the water, skipping stones and listening to the gentle flow, Emma felt a deep sense of contentment. I never thought I'd find a place like this, she said softly. A place where I could feel safe, where I could belong. I thought I'd be running forever. James looked at her with quiet understanding. Sometimes we need to find the right place and the right person to help us stop running. You've done the hard part, learning to trust and letting yourself stay. That's where real change begins.
Emma smiled, feeling the truth of his words. For the first time, she realized that her past, filled with fear and loss, did not have to dictate her future. She could choose to embrace life, to build something lasting, and to cherish the connection she had been too afraid to seek before. And in James, she had found not just a protector, but a companion, a steady presence who encouraged her growth and shared in her joys. As spring turned to early summer, their bond deepened. It was no longer just trust or companionship. It had grown into something stronger, something subtle and unspoken, yet undeniable. Emma noticed the way James would glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking, the quiet attention he paid to her needs, and the gentle patience he showed in guiding her. She, in turn, began to care for him in ways that went beyond gratitude. She prepared meals he liked, tended the garden more carefully, and learned the small habits that made his life easier. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, and the prairie seemed to glow in the fading light. Emma leaned slightly against James, feeling the comfort of his steady presence.
"I've never had someone care like this before," she admitted quietly. "I've been afraid to let anyone in. But now I feel like I belong. Not just here, but with you."
James turned to her, his eyes soft and kind.
"And you do belong, Emma. Here, with me, on this land. You've earned it. And more importantly, you've allowed yourself to accept it. That's a rare and beautiful thing."
Her heart swelled with emotion. She had faced so much fear and uncertainty, and now, for the first time, she felt truly safe, truly connected, and truly hopeful. It was not a sudden, magical transformation, but a quiet, steady growth, a gentle healing of past wounds nurtured by trust, patience, and shared life. The following days were filled with small celebrations of life. They harvested the first vegetables of the season together, fed the animals, and repaired fences that had been damaged by spring storms. Each task was a shared responsibility, a shared success, and a shared moment of joy. The ranch, which had once been a place of solitude for James and a refuge for Emma, had become a home, a place of belonging, hope, and quiet happiness. One night, as the stars blanketed the prairie sky, Emma and James sat by the fire. The flames danced, casting warm light across their faces. Emma rested her head on James's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the calm strength he offered. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she whispered. "Like life could be kind, like I could trust, like I could be happy." James held her gently, feeling the same quiet joy and relief.
"Life can surprise us, Emma. Sometimes in the hardest moments we find what we need most. You've found safety, trust, and a place to belong. And I've found a companion. Someone who makes this life richer than I ever imagined."
The wind whispered through the tall grass, the prairie stretched endlessly, and the ranch stood as a symbol of hope, growth, and new beginnings. Emma realized that the day she had collapsed on the fence, scared and alone, had led her here to warmth, trust, and a life worth living. James realized that the day he chose compassion over hesitation had not only saved a life but had brought new meaning to his own. And as the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, both of them understood that the future, though uncertain, would be faced together.
They had discovered the quiet power of human connection, the strength of trust, and the beauty of second chances. In the vast, unpredictable world, they had found each other, and in doing so, they had found hope, healing, and a new beginning that would last a lifetime.